Fewer people may ride public transit in this community compared to other cities our size, but still, around 20,000 people a day rely on the bus to take them where they need to go. On Tuesday, voters in Kansas City, Missouri are being asked to renew a tax that its supporters say is vital for keeping those buses rolling and avoiding drastic cuts in service. Opponents say don't be fooled, there's no rush, and a yes vote only jeopardizes Kansas City's hopes of implementing light rail. So how do you decide? On the eve of Election Day, we weigh up the bus tax with its supporters and opponents on this special election edition of Kansas City Week in Review. Hello, I'm Nick Haynes. Good to have you with us again. If you live in Kansas City, Missouri, or simply work, eat, or shop there, you've no doubt seen signs popping up on the sides of busy streets and in people's yards like this one. It is for question 1, which asks you to consider renewing the current 3/8 cent sales tax that funds the Metro's largest transit provider, the Kansas City Area Transportation Authority. Now, by saying yes, you would extend that tax for another 15 years. The tax brings in nearly $22 million annually. That's about 30% of the ATA's entire budget. The tax language makes it clear the money can only be used for buses. And that's a problem for Clay Chastain, whose voter-approved light rail plan in 2006 would have used this sales tax money to implement a commuter rail system. He says the city has acted in bad faith and is compromising any light rail in the future. Also with us are 2 tax proponents, Councilman Ed Ford, who leads the city's Transportation Committee, and attorney Sly James, who is representing the Yes on One campaign. Now, I should also point out we also invited a representative from the Kansas City chapter of the American Institute of Architects, which is also opposing the bus tax. Executive Board Member Kevin Klinkenberg says there needs to be a comprehensive approach to funding transit, or, quote, we run the risk of light rail not happening anytime soon, end quote. Kevin agreed to join us, but then abruptly backed out after the AIA board decided they didn't want to be seen on the program opposing the tax next to Mr. Chastain. Now, for those of you who are not watching in high definition, I'm happy to report Mr. Chastain is wearing clean underwear and is not creating any noticeable odor in the studio. Is that fair to say, Mr. Chastain?
Not yet.
Okay. But Sly James, help me out here. First of all, just in terms of a tax here, this is a renewal of a tax. So does that mean that people will not see any more money going from their pocketbooks if they actually said yes on Tuesday?
Absolutely. It's the same tax that's been paid. We're simply asking that they extend it for an additional 15 years so that the ATA can do proper long-term planning, keep providing the services they've been providing, continue to innovate and to refine the efficiencies of the bus system, and to provide a service that this community absolutely positively must have.
And first of all, Clay, you would agree with that. It doesn't actually involve any tax increase for members of the public.
That's correct. And we're not saying that we don't need a good bus system. We're saying that to give away the farm to this diesel bus-based transit system that only serves 5% of the people, provides no economic benefits to the city, jobs for the poor people, and in fact, it actually stigmatizes, alienates, and further segregates the poor people on a mode of transit that 95% of the people do not want to use. So does it make sense, and diesel prices are soaring, does it make sense to invest this money into this bus system and not have a comprehensive transit system that includes light rail, a transit hub at Union Station, maybe a commuter train, greenway bicycle pass? And so this is sort of taking all of our tax money, precious tax money, and sinking it into something that's not working. Now, I know they've made some improvements, and efficiency is up a little bit, but 14% increase in efficiency over something that was abysmal to begin with, an abysmal number. 14% of nothing is virtually still nothing. So, and I want to relate one little story. Can I real quick?
Very quickly, and we're going to go to Councilman.
I was going to Kinko's last night to make these boards up. My sister took me. We're on 39th Street. Go by a big bus at 6:18 p.m. Bus number 39, completely empty except for 3 people. Turn on the J.C. Nichols Parkway. 3 buses go by, all empty, huge diesel buses. Then, when I'm going into Kinko's, here's an employee standing there at the door, and he says, Clay, he says, light rail's pretty tough, isn't it? I said, boy, you know it. And he says, well, he says, Clay, I used to drive a truck, got 12 miles to the gallon, and I sold that truck to ride the bus. And I thought, oh, no, he's for the bus tax, you know. And he goes, but you know the funny thing is, Every time I get on that bus, I'm the only one on that bus. And he says, and I know it gets less miles per gallon than my truck, but he says, I ain't putting the gas in the vehicle. The Kansas City, Missouri taxpayers are. And if you see 4 buses in 5 minutes going to Kinko's that are empty, can you imagine the number of buses?
But as we pointed out at the very beginning, thousands of people, though, still do ride the bus. So, Councilman Ford, what really then is at stake in your estimation in this election? If voters said, as this member of the public at Kinko's said, I'm going to vote no on this, so what? Does that mean the buses don't roll anymore?
What it means is, and let's look at the numbers, we have 15 million riders a year. 50,000 riders a day. Now, some of those folks are saying they ride to and from, they may transfer, but it's a significant number of people who rely on the bus to get to work, to get to school, to get to their doctor's appointments. We will have to make significant cutbacks in the 30 to 40% range without this 3/8 tax. It's about 30% of the operating budget of the ATA.
But are you claiming, though, that if people vote no on this tax, that the buses won't roll anymore, or at least there'll be fewer buses driving on the city streets in Kansas City, Missouri?
There'll certainly be fewer buses. We'll have to significantly, if not completely, eliminate Sunday service, evening service, service in outlying areas, many of which we've increased over the last 4 years. Northland, for example.
So some people then obviously may not ride the bus at all, Clay, and you've spoken to them.
Well,
but what about those people who do depend on the bus? Well, what happens to them if people vote no on Tuesday?
What's going to happen if they vote no on Tuesday is those empty diesel buses are going to stop rolling. That's what's going to stop rolling. They're going to become more efficient. They need to get hybrid electric buses in the system, smaller buses. We're going to make them be more efficient. That's what's going to happen. Now, he talked about all the people that ride the bus system daily. This is a letter from, as I see it, from one of their people. He's Gaylord Salisbury in the As I See It Star. He said, quote, 10 to 11,000 people daily use the bus system. Now, I want to show one of these boards here. In other words, these people, 10 to 11,000, use it daily, and they have to ride it. They have to get on 4 or 5 different buses, and they count those people as riders. But only 10 to 11,000 people a day actually ride it. Here's a chart I did at Kinko's last night. Cost breakdown of ATA diesel bus system. The taxes they bring in, local, federal, and state, $80 million a year. That's their budget. You multiply that in 15 years, that's $1,200 million. And there's 10,000 daily bus riders. So you divide that into the tax amount they want, and that's costing taxpayers $120,000 per rider of the bus system. That's how inefficient it is. As an alternative, we could give each one of those 10,000 riders a $25,000 hybrid vehicle, strip model. That amounts to $250 million. We can give them a 15-year car allowance on operation and maintenance. All 10,000 of them, $25,000 allowance, generous. That's another $250 million. And we can give a cab allowance for those unable to drive, handicapped, etc. That comes to I'm estimating $100 million for that. But the total, $600 million versus $1.2 billion. We provide this system, and the taxpayers get a $600 million refund. That is how inefficient it is.
Sly James, when people would look at that and say, well, that is a lot of money, and per rider, that we're spending a lot of public dollars on that. What is your defense then of the bus service when you're looking at those figures?
A couple of things. And one of the things that I might say is that under that scenario that Mr. Chastain proposes, we ought to just take whatever money he's advocating for the light rail system, and we won't need that. We can put everybody in a hybrid car, and we can give everybody an allowance to operate their vehicles, and we can do away with the entire light rail system. The fact of the matter is simply this. There is an economic advantage to Kansas City. People use those buses to get to and from schools. He says it stigmatizes people as poor. It doesn't. I was a student in the city. I've lived here all my life, still live here. I took that bus to and from school every day. When I was at Rockhurst College, I took it to work over on Rainbow Boulevard every night, caught it again every morning, and went back to school. Those buses are used for real people to get to real places that are important to them. The whole situation that he's trying to describe is A, based on numbers that aren't verified by anybody other than the person he talked to at Kinko's and something he pulled out of a piece of paper. He hasn't used any of the statistics from the ATA. There are numbers there, and if he cares to look for them, he can find the real numbers and use those. And I would be willing to bet that would change his analysis quite a bit.
Okay, I just quoted you, Mr. James, from one of your people that, as I see it, Tom, he says 10 to 11,000. He's a representative, a spokesperson for the ATA. The Kansas City Star, where's that article, said in their editorial right here that the budget is almost $80 million a year. I'm not picking figures out of the sky. And another thing, when you talk about that we could not do light rail and just buy everybody a hybrid car.
By your
light
analysis?
Rail, no. Light rail will boost the ridership tremendously like it has in other cities. You're not going to get an abysmal 4% of the people riding a light rail. Wait a minute. You're going to get maybe 40 or 50% riding that kind of a multimodal, comprehensive transit system. And light rail provides all kinds of economic benefits and jobs and tourism and conventions and economic development that the diesel bus does not provide, and therefore that's the difference.
And are you saying the light rail is going to run down every street in this city? Or are there going to have to, well, then let me finish. Then are there going to have to be ways for people to utilize that light rail to get there? Or are you suggesting that everybody drive their car to a stopping point and get on light rail and ride around town? People who need to get to light rail, when and if it is developed in this town, will need to have buses to get there.
Absolutely.
The buses are absolutely vital to the transportation system. I happen to be in favor. I happen to be in favor of light rail. I think it's a good thing. But the fact of the matter is that you're not going to be able to efficiently utilize and completely utilize light rail if you don't provide adequate means for people outside of the core, right on the light rail systems, to be able to get to it, to utilize it. And those are the same people that you are saying are either being stigmatized as poor or somehow economically deprived. And that's simply not true. There's a lot of people who use those buses. A lot of people on the plaza use those buses to go downtown for events. They're not all poor. And the fact of the matter is what difference does it make anyhow? Even the poor needs access to the same amenities and the same services as everybody else in the city. And they use buses to get there.
Let me answer your question. Now, first of all, you remember what your first question was to me?
Now, I'm not sure anymore, but go ahead.
Remember what it was?
No,
You remember what it was now?
You tell us.
I've forgotten. You went on so long, I've forgotten what your original question was.
Don't start bogarting.
But look, the point is this, is that the diesel bus system does not used by 95% of the people. Why not put a transit system on that everybody can use, that black man can sit next to the white man on, the rich man next to the poor man, that provides this economic benefit for the city? Why do we want to keep going with a dog that won't hunt?
Okay, this is being portrayed as it's either buses or we have to have trains. Is that a false argument?
That is a
Councilman
false
Ford?
argument. In fact, I would tell the listeners that without the bus system, without this tax, we'll never have light rail. That any kind of light rail system needs an excellent bus system to complement it. The starter line we're working on, that we'll be voting on in November, has over 60 bus routes that will intersect with the light rail route. We'll have max buses running at the terminus at each end and parallel in some cases. So that's a false argument. There's no bigger light rail advocate that lives in Kansas City than myself.
So why wouldn't you then wait, as some people would suggest, for this whole ballot measure so that we can have a comprehensive proposal that would fund buses and light rail at the same time, not do a separate ballot measure right now in April for just buses alone?
And that's an excellent question. We studied that very carefully, and our analysis indicated that we would probably doom both the buses and light rail by putting both issues on at the same time.
Now that is an issue of conjecture, even among people at the Kansas City Star. On yesterday's Ruckus program, Yael Abahalka, the editorial writer, had this to say.
Well, this is a toast to all the people in Kansas City who will vote no on the bus tax question 1 next Tuesday. Let me explain. I'm not against buses, but the bus tax doesn't expire for 1 year. This is an attempt by the ATA, Air Transportation Authority, to ram through the bus tax before we in Kansas City have a light rail plan before a comprehensive plan is put before us. And this notion that, oh, we're going to have buses with light rail. Well, sure we are, but how many? How much? How expensive? Where will they go? We don't know any of that yet. Let's postpone, let's kill the bus tax, have an election in November to decide what light rail, what buses we need. That's a much, much more thoughtful approach to it.
Well, that was Yael Abahalka on the Ruckus program, which you can see the repeat version on Sunday at 11:30. But your response then, City Councilman, to that, we're rushing into something.
Well,
why can't we just wait?
It's interesting that the rest of the Kansas City Star editorial board disagrees with Yale on this issue and have in fact endorsed the bus tax and our approach to it. We're going to need the buses with or without light rail. Light rail is going to have to succeed or fail on its own merits. Those who want to link them both at the hip are wrong, but they are complementary.
Okay, Clay?
Nick, first of all, I want to go back. I did finally remember his questions. His question was, we need buses to feed the light rail system. In the plan that they repealed, 75,000 people voted for the light rail plan. My plan was comprehensive. It had a light rail spine and it had electric shuttle buses and hybrid electric buses feeding it. Clean, quiet buses, not diesel buses. So I did provide a service to bring people to those rail stops and get on the light rail system. So that's the answer to your question. Now, I'd say amen to what Yale said, and I'm shocked that Yale and I have never agreed on anything before, so we must be lined up with the truth here. But the overshadowing issue here is the trust factor. You know, just like this debate, you know, they changed who was going to be here 4 times on you, Nick, right before the debate. Remember that? You know that. And I knew who they knew who they were going to debate because I agreed a month ago. But they didn't say who was going to debate me. So I didn't even know. They disrespected me. They disrespected you in this show by not saying who was going to be here, because you need to prepare for who your opponent is, right? And this is the emblematic of this manipulation by these people, that they disrespected the democratic process in repealing the People's Light Rail Plan. They disrespected the political process and the judicial process even, and the political process. You know, they disrespected that in HNTB, this campaign finance reform report by the Star. Did you see that?
Yes, I did. In fact, we have some of those, you're talking about the campaign contributions
from HNTB
that came into the Yes campaign. They're on your screen there, and the point of that is what?
Well, the point is this, that when the light rail passed, who did the city put in charge of analyzing the light rail plan the voters approved? The ATA, the arch enemy of the light rail plan. And who did they hire? They hired HNTB, who does business with the city on a regular basis. And what did HNTB do? They trashed the plan and said it wasn't workable. And that's what the repeal was based upon.
Okay, well, let's get
wait a minute. Let me just finish.
Very quickly,
okay,
and I really want to respond very quickly.
What does HNTB do? They get a $3 million sweetheart deal from the ATA to study the ATA's streetcar plan. And then, you know what else? During the campaign, bus campaign, the HNTB kicks back 25 grand to the bus campaign. Marvelous. And the beat goes on in Kansas City.
What about the democracy aspect of this, Sly James, when we, in the November election, Clay Chastain's light rail plan in 2006 did pass with the majority of voters? 53% of the population of Kansas City, Missouri who voted said yes, they wanted that. And on that ballot it said that that money for that service would come from the current transit tax that is now being renewed. Is this a slap in the face to voters then by not going through and carrying through with Clay Chastain's plan?
Personally, I would have preferred that it had not been handled in that way, but I'm not on the council. I'm not in city government. I had absolutely nothing to do with that.
I'd rather honesty.
Well, it's a matter of being honest. And you know what? I didn't even need to know that you were going to be here to debate in order to prepare, because the facts are the facts. This isn't about who you're debating. It's about what's best for Kansas City. And you and I can disagree about that, and I think we can disagree about that without being disagreeable. The fact of the matter is, from my perspective, that people in this town need these buses. Now, whether or not they're electric or not, I'm fine with that. But you're not going to go out and just trade in your diesel buses dollar for dollar for electric buses. All of these things that you're advocating cost money, and maybe some of them are good. But that has nothing to do with whether or not this tax needs to be renewed. This tax needs to be renewed in order to keep the people who are dependent on buses in positions where they can get to school, where they can get to jobs, where they can be economically viable people in this society and do the things that they need to do. It's just that simple. This is not a slap against you. It's not a slap against light rail. It is simply a strategic move to try to get the buses operating over the long term. And if you wait till November, two things may happen. I agree with Councilman Ford. I remember very well the stadium initiative where there were two competing issues, or they were actually very much similar about the same thing. And people reported after that that they were confused. They didn't know if they voted for this one, what would happen, or that one, what would happen. And because of that, one of them failed, one of them succeeded. Now, I would submit that having learned that lesson about having two related ballot issues on the same ballot that are separate, that the smart person would say, let's not do that again because we want both of these things to succeed.
I want to get to you back in a second, but let me go back to Councilman Ford. We were talking about the trust issue.
Yes.
But when voters then did support the light rail effort that Clay Chastain had in November 2006 election, people saying, good Lord, I voted for that. And then the city council, didn't follow through on that, didn't implement that. How can I trust them? How do you respond to that then,
The way I respond, we would have loved, if that plan was doable, legal, financially feasible, we would have built that plan. But the reality is, Clay overpromised. He promised 27 miles from the zoo to the airport. And the reality is, by taking the bus money and going through parks that would not have received any federal funds, and at most you could have built about 6 miles. He promised us a technology that's used nowhere but one city in France for about a mile. And he promised us electric buses that simply do not exist in the way he described them to be. So it was such a fatally flawed plan that as a councilman, my choice was, well, if we put it back on the ballot, and even if the voters approve it again, we can't do it. So we need to be upfront with the voters and say that under our city charter, you get 8,000 signatures, you can put just about anything you want on the ballot. But the protection is that the council has the ability to repeal plans that just aren't feasible, that just won't work. But what we did is we listened to the voters, and we have worked for the past year and a half on coming up with a feasible light rail plan.
I want to talk about that in a moment, but a response from you, Mr.
There's so much bull flying there that, first of all, this is an attorney. It's two attorneys, not technical people. I have an advanced degree in electrical engineering.
And you plant trees for a living.
Yeah, I do, but I've been on the honor roll, Dean's honor roll in college. I worked my way through school. I passed a professional engineering training exam. I have a lot of urban transit experience and mechanical experience, and this guy's a country lawyer. And he's talking to people about a very complex transit issue, and he doesn't know what he's talking about. Now, the fact of the matter is, you could have, Mr. Ford, respected that vote and said, okay, even if you did earnestly, sincerely believe that plan was flawed, you could have gone back to the voters if you tried to implement and say, look, we run into obstacles. We want you to approve changes to it.
You know how much of your plan we could have saved, Clay?
You can approve changes to these changes have to be made. We ask you to approve them. You took the decision out of the hands of the voters not once, but twice, because you didn't let them vote on Nutter's repeal because you know better. Because you've been instructed to what to say by the establishment to kill this plan. You're their point man. You used to be on the board of the ATA. You have a conflict of interest, and the people decide. The law says the people have the right to legislate equally well or bad as do elected officials, meaning you. And that if it's a bad plan, so be it. They wanted it, and they should have gotten it.
All righty, Clay. We're going to get a response from Councilman Ford, and then we're going to move on to a little bit of the future of light rail here. Right. With Councilman Ford, a chance to respond.
Right. It's somewhat frustrating when someone who doesn't even live here anymore and lives 1,000 miles away and has lived. And we also have this outside group funding a campaign against the buses, and they're anonymous, and they're obviously from outside the area. Clay can't even get anyone else to sit with him today for obvious reasons. Clay projects himself as this know-it-all engineer that knows more than HMTB, a international engineering firm that has built light rail in many cities, that he knows more about light rail than them. He plants trees for a living. He plants trees for a living.
Well, that's an honest living. I don't know what you do for a living.
I would like to get away from Mr. Chastain because Mr. Chastain, in my opinion, is not the issue. The issue here is what are we going to do about the buses in this city and the people in this city who need them. This tax on Tuesday is an important ballot issue for the people who use buses in this city. And frankly, whether or not Mr. Chastain lives here or not on this issue is irrelevant. On the light rail issue, it is absolutely relevant.
Okay, you've established the reasons why people may want to vote for this based on the merits of the bus system. But let's talk about those people who would say, look, I dream of the day that there will be light rail in this community.
Sure.
And I'm concerned if I vote yes on this, I'm basically killing off any prospects of light rail in the future.
And actually,
How
just
do you
the
respond
just
to
the
those
opposite.
individuals who feel that way?
Just the opposite. A no vote will doom light rail
Why?
in the city because we won't have the basic bus system to support light rail. And without that basic bus system, you can't have light rail. And that's what Clay fails to realize. You look at every light rail system in the country, that 70%, 90% of the folks that ride on light rail start or end their trips on buses or parking rides. It does not operate in a vacuum. It operates with buses. So if you want light rail, we need to pass this vote
Like Yale said, the
on
bus
Tuesday.
system's not going to shut down if they don't get this 3/8 tax. They're going to be more efficient, and we'll still have a bus system, and we'll move forward. Here's the poll that they didn't want to come out. And the Star on their prime bus said, new light rail poll results exposed. In other words, they were trying to hide it. And it's not good news for light rail. And it talks about putting a sales tax on the ballot in November, which is what this would require if the bus tax passes. Straddle light rail with a sales tax. It shows it failing for a 3/8 and a 1/4 sales tax. And Mr. Singleton, who wrote a letter to the editor today in the paper, says that Mr. Singleton quoted as saying, from everything I've been told, the 3/8 isn't going to pass. So this does jeopardize light rail. I'm not saying it absolutely dooms it, but it doesn't help it any.
Okay, final word on that, Councilman Ford.
It is going to be a tough sell to the voters. Unlike Clay, we can't promise light rail for free. We can't overpromise 27 miles when we can only build 12. So we will be honest with the voters and say, for a 3/8 sales tax in November, this is what you get.
Okay, and you've been hearing, ladies and gentlemen, from the proponents and opponents of question 1 on Tuesday's ballot in Kansas City, Missouri, the bus tax. Our thanks to Kansas City Councilman Ed Ford and Slide James of the Yes on One campaign. And opposing the tax, light rail champion Clay Chastain. You can vote on the bus tax this upcoming Tuesday, along with a number of other measures on the Kansas City, Missouri ballot, including the smoking ban we debated last week on the program. Polling stations open at 6 a.m. and will remain open until 7 in the evening on Tuesday. I'm Nick Haynes from all of us at KCPT. Thanks for spending part of your weekend with us.